Welcome back to the 273rd episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through two stories. I was going to do a lot more, but there was one story that really caught my eye. I actually listened to the entire podcast that it gives a transcript for, and I want to break it down. It's talking about objectivity in journalism. And we'll sprinkle in a little example of how they're actually wrong and how we need objectivity in journalism with our second article. So the first one comes from Truth Out. And like I said, it is from a podcast. The headline of it is Movement Memos. Oh, wait, hold on. Before we get there, let's get to the daily debate. Should we actually strive for objectivity in journalism? Is it something that we can actually achieve? Yes, no, maybe. Throw your opinions down there in the comment section. Love to hear what people have to say. So, like I was saying, this comes from a podcast, Movement Memos, from Truth Out. And they have a transcript here that I will be reading from every once in a while. I've tried to find a way to pipe in the audio, but I still have to work on a few things in order to get that in there. So maybe that is a future endeavor. But what's going on here in this article is two people who, I don't want to say are cynical, because they seem to have hope about change within our system. And they actually view journalism as a tool to do that. Basically, journalism is meant, from their point of view, multiple times you hear them talking about journalism using to transform the system. And basically, these people have a very specific perspective, which is that we have to constantly transform and revolutionize, or at least have a quote-unquote revolution to move forward and bring about a world that we could all be happy with. And they see journalism as a tool of said revolution. So the whole idea that they're going for here, because the headline reads, "Objectivity in journalism is a deadly myth that serves Israel military and cops." And it was very poignant, or I should say really relevant for them to talk about the Israeli military and talk about cops, though they do spend only maybe 5 to 10 minutes actually going into the idea that this is something that is directly serving Israel and serving the cops. They spend a longer time talking about how this is something that is a tool for the powerful. This objective journalism is only there to really enforce the status quo. I actually took some notes within the first minute of listening, or this was actually within the first 10 minutes. So one of the first quotes from the host was, "Normalizing the status quo is a political position and a bad one." And the guest said within the first maybe 5 lines of them speaking, "Objectivity is the ideology of the status quo." And they were describing how this objectivity, this idea of objectivity came about, and they called it the performative neutral. So why are they criticizing objectivity so much? Why are they coming after it? Is it 100% possible to always be objective? If you listen to this podcast, I try to go through stories and I try to give some people the benefit of the doubt. I try to criticize where I can, but no, I am not 100% objective. I'm sorry. Could we even pretend that? I mean, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know that I'm not 100% objective. I have my biases. As much as I could possibly try to rein in some of those biases, they're still going to shine through. When we talk about economics, you can most definitely feel my lean towards capitalism and a system that is not centrally planned. I have deep fears about it. I have paranoia about a centrally planned system. And if you listen to almost any piece where I talk about economics and talk about economic theory, you can definitely feel that. Maybe I should be more upfront. Maybe I should say from the very beginning, I am a laissez-faire, minimal mixed economy, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I should lay all of that out there. Sure. and that would be an attempt at getting towards objectivity. But my point being that it is truly impossible to not let your biases come through. But that doesn't mean objectivity shouldn't be something that we strive for. That doesn't mean that objectivity shouldn't be something that we call people out for not achieving. And there's multiple reasons for this. One of the reasons that the authors claim that this was happening, they mentioned it there, or the guest specifically mentioned it, is the idea that this is performative neutrality in order to really sell newspapers coming into like the 19th century, because before that they were very partisan. And this is very true. During the founding Fathers Days, you had multiple newspapers that were more of a more federalist bend and some that were a little bit more anti-federalist. You had Alexander Hamilton basically controlling different pieces coming out in New York Federalist papers, and you had the papers in Pennsylvania who were going and saying, "Hey, we need to actually make sure that these executive powers." Articles that Hamilton's putting out there underneath pseudonyms in order to promote the idea that the executive has X power and Y power and Z power. We need to counteract this narrative. So there was more of a anti-federalist kind of mindset coming out of these different papers, and they were obviously partisan. They were basically opinion pieces, which is fair enough. They're not wrong that this was the nature of things. And then as we went further and further, we started to have this appeal to a larger audience. These newspapers no longer just spoke to their local area. They were speaking to a larger majority, or maybe they were fighting for market share, and that's why they had to put on this performative neutrality in order to appeal to more people. And I want to agree and disagree with that point. The point that, yes, they have to appeal to more people, the market was becoming more saturated, so they had larger segments of the population that they were trying to actually keep reading their newspaper. That actually forced them to the middle. That didn't necessarily force them into objectivity. That forced them to have a point of view for one political issue and a point of view for the same political issue from another side. Because guess what? You do have to talk to in this case, modern day, you have to talk to some of your progressives who agree with some things. You may have to talk to your libertarians who agree on some of those same points, but for different reasons. And you may have to talk to your anarcho-Republicans. You may have to talk to all those different people, and they may agree on the point, they just may disagree on the why. And in trying to be objective, or at least striving to show as many points of view as possible, or allow counter arguments to have their time, to have their air within your articles and within the newspaper, or even in broadcasting world, to have the opposite person come on a panel, you need to at least allow that opinion in there, because guess what? There are people who may not agree with the overall message, but they still watch and they still care about hearing other opinions, but they also want to make sure that there is some sort of representation for their point of view in there. And these authors, or one of them is, the guest is actually an author of a book, and the host is she's very, very kind. She does sound a bit robotic at some points, but that's just me, digging at her for no good reason. She was a very good interviewer. It felt like the conversation did feel a bit stifled. I honestly feel like the interviewer recorded something and sent it to the guest, and it sounds robotic. Their voices never overlap. It is very segmented. It is cut to the point where talk, block of text, and then, okay, give it a half second, give it a pause, and then the guest takes it up. It didn't feel quite natural, in my opinion. That what leads me to believe that one segment was recorded before the other and then sent over so the person could fill the gaps, or there was a transcript sent and they just answer the questions there on their own. And the reason that this is important is it does not allow for a fluid movement in the conversation, in that when you know what somebody is asking you, or you know what the responses are, or you have your preset questions, basically, and you have a response that's given in a brief summary before they actually outline it, because let's be clear, the host here actually, so how should I say this? The host does respond to certain things that the guest says, but she uses it as a point to jump off into a 4-minute tirade. So it feels very stifled, and it doesn't feel like there's a natural flow to it. It feels like they have an agenda and they're trying to get that point across. Great for them. And it is a very consistent message of, we need to always make sure that we are analyzing the power dynamics and using our journalism in order to aid that. And this is something where they make good points about the fact that Israel does use its influence as a nation and with its different interests within the United States. And it says to politicians, hey, do you want to come and do a tour of Israel? They offer these tours for free, and it's like they compare it directly to a sit down or coffee with a cop. And this is meant to buy you into the system. If you sit down with a cop and you have a conversation about their family, you have a conversation about what's going on in their life, their whole story about why they joined the force, so on and so forth, you are humanizing that cop. And of course, that is going to affect the outlook that people have on it. If a journalist is let into a situation where they're trying to cover a story and they also are offered, hey, have a sit down with the cop that was involved in it, it is a moment to humanize them and to make sure that their point of view is more prominently talked about. And the authors seem to, I don't want to say hate the idea of humanizing them, but it is most definitely something that you can feel in their underlying tones when they're discussing the idea. So let me take 1 second to get down to a point where they talk about it. Quote, so if you think of all the cop shows and you think about the birthright tours and you think about all the friendship visits of U.S. officials to Israel, it's as if there's no Palestine, where there's that, as if there's no Palestine. And you think about coffee with a cop. These are all the same school of actually deeply violent militaristic propaganda that tries to soften something that only exists to control vulnerable people. And what's really interesting, that's the end of this quote before the guest stops speaking and they go back to the interviewer. And what they talk about, literally, a paragraph, this interviewee, literally 1 or 2 paragraphs beforehand, is the fact that, they actually dehumanize a lot of the victims. They dehumanize a lot of people who are on the other side of these stories. Quote, they're almost co-developed. And some of the techniques, I think key techniques that they use is dehumanization, kind of making invisible the real stories of people behind the violence. So let's stop here. So they're saying, on one hand, hey, no, we don't want to use these tactics that actually humanize the people that are going around and are committing these sort of terrible things in their mind, but also they're dehumanizing the people on the other end, the ones who are being assaulted or being they have this violence perpetrated against them. So what you want it both ways? You want to dehumanize the people who are committing the violence, but you want to humanize the people that are having the violence committed against them. I guess I can understand your point of view if it's all about power, because they can't see a cop or they can't see IDF soldiers as individual people. No, they are tools of the system, and they can't look at the people that are victimized as anything but sole individuals that have been oppressed by said system. So we really have to draw the contrast and humanize them. It's not that I think that dehumanizing is good. My point is, maybe you should humanize both of them. Maybe you should say, hey, this person did some terrible things. I want to show the other part of their life, and this person was the perpetrator of terrible things, but also they I want to show their life. And the reason is not because I want to forgive the person that did something violent. Okay, so I'll lay out an exact example here. Somebody murders somebody else. YouTube's going to hate this section because I'm using bad words. But someone murders somebody else, and then a cop responds, and instead of taking him into custody, he believes that his life's under threat, and let's just say he wrongly shoots him, that it wasn't necessary. In both of those cases, you can take one of two approaches. You can either dehumanize both of them and lambast them for their terrible ethical and moral behavior, or you can humanize both of them and outline that, yes, while these things were terrible, they were still both human. I think both approaches have their flaws. I think the dehumanizing is, oh, well, hey, these are just the bad apples. And I think that has its flaws right there because it doesn't examine further. But I also think that just humanizing them may make it seem as though that this sort of behavior to some degree is okay, even if it's not on a conscious level. Why I think the humanizing tactic is better is because I want every single person who hears about a violent criminal, who hears about a terrible policeman, I want them to know that there is a backstory there, that they are human just like you. Every human is capable of this. Every single human. Now, the authors would probably say it's because of systems that oppress. It's because of systems that warp human beings. I would say it's because no, human beings are inherently flawed, and we always need to be reminded of that. But it's interesting how they can take one tact with one group of people and not the tact with another group of people. It really does come down to the oppressor narrative, which also overall merges very nicely with their idea that, okay, we need to have a revolution against the system of the powerful. We need to empower the less powerful. And we need to use all of these things, journalism, activism, so on, as tools for said revolution. Because let's be clear. When they say that, hey, we need to humanize criminals, or we need to humanize people who do terrible things, or we just need to humanize people, they're not always saying that they're not always talking about violent criminals, but sometimes they literally talk about violent criminals, and they say, hey, if they have to deal with this sort of narrative casting where they are just seen as bad and the cops are just seen as good, we need to use our journalism as a tool to humanize them. And that is great. That's understandable. But the whole point about objectivity, the whole point about what they're arguing about, or at least what they say they're talking about, is that you do that even-handedly. Because, well, if you want to actually make sure that everybody who is reading has an accurate picture, or at least that everybody you're covering gets the same sort of treatment, you would humanize one and not the other. But it falls perfectly within their ideas, which is, no. Objectivity is dead. We don't need to be objective. And it also literally falls in line with the idea that this needs to be a tool for the revolution. So obviously, using it with a political bend, if it's a tool for a revolution, if it's trying to upset the status quo, which I wouldn't even agree that objectivity enforces the status quo 100% of the time. So I think that point falls mute. But even if we were to accept that point from them, that okay, we have to make sure that we're using this thing that we don't think should be objective, we don't think could be objective anyway, and we don't want it to be objective because we want to use it as a tool. It wraps up everything so nicely. Oh, no. Objective journalism is dead. We don't have to be objective. And, well, we're using it for a tool for the revolution anyway, so yeah, that makes sense that we want to push our agenda here. I took another note as I was listening within the first another 15 minutes, and I didn't take notes throughout the entire thing because I was at the gym while I was listening. I was like, okay, hey, I can multitask a little bit here. I can really get into the weeds on this one because it was a really long transcript, and I said, okay, hey, if it's a podcast, I can listen to it, and I ideally thought, I could pipe in some of the audio. Like I said, that is a future development. But the note I took down to myself, and I'm just going to read it here because it may be a little bit unintelligible because I was walking, but here's what it says. Quote, talks about the need for transformative change, especially on the environmental front, and makes a very bold claims as to why this is needed, while shirking at objectivity. Doesn't have to consider another point of view. So the author is saying, all of this is so true, we have to deal with this in this way, it's going to be the end of our world, and they don't even have to take up somebody else's point of view. They don't even have to entertain the other side of the conversation, that maybe we can actually at least mitigate some of the factors, not just through cutting our emissions, but through evolving our technology and actually prospering and innovating as we've innovated out of many problems in the past. And I finish up the comment with, quote, or the truth. So basically, let me actually restart there. Quote, doesn't have to consider another point of view or the truth when not worried about objectivity. So you don't even have to attempt to reach the truth, because no, objectivity is gone. So my subjective point of view is actually the only thing that reigns. My analysis of the world is true enough that I can put it out there, and that it obviously is valid enough that it can stand as journalism. So let me ask a simple question. If objectivity is gone, a woman says that, no, you know what? That's going to be too politically heated. I want to give it the best example I can. Say a man says that this person said something really mean to me, and he genuinely felt like he heard it. Maybe he had his AirPods in, maybe he just wasn't fully paying attention, but he thought that a terrible, terrible phrase was leveled at him, and he goes on to write an article about how this person is terrible, slandering their character, saying you shouldn't allow this. And because he truly believes what he's saying, and he's not chasing objectivity, he's not chasing the truth, he doesn't even pull up the audio recording from the meeting, where it turns out, no, he just actually misheard them. He didn't actually have anything terrible said against him, but no, his subjective worldview, his belief system, his way of seeing it won out. And since objectivity is dead, and he doesn't even have to attempt to find out the truth, he doesn't even have to pretend that anything besides his point of view matters, he doesn't even take the time. And that is why objectivity is important. I am not saying that you will truly be able to leave behind your biases, but you have to take mitigating steps in order to make sure that what you are saying is true. And having objectivity, at least as an ideal to look up to, allows us to do that. It provides us with a standard for which we have to try to attain, even if we are not ever going to attain it. We're never going, just like the authors probably believe, that all these systems are the oppressors and we can attain a perfect world. If we just highlight all of the terrible things, we try to tear down these systems, and we try to empower and show the stories of the victimized and paint them in a positive light, they are idealizing the fact that, oh yes, we can perfect things, or at least we can make it so much better, and that we can actually come to a place where everything is perfect. We can get rid of all the bad systems that corrupt human beings, and we can then move forward in happiness and joy and blah, 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 blah. Though I am being hyperbolic, I would not be surprised if they actually believe something to this effect based on a lot of their language that I heard. Please go listen to the entire podcast so you can understand what I mean by that. But in the world of reality, at least with my priors, and yes, hey, I say the world of reality, and I'm saying it like it's objective, that I guess this is my bias right here. Human beings, in my opinion, cannot be perfected. Human beings are always going to be flawed. And having that standard of objectivity is a mitigating factor for those flaws. It is the first net that any story should have to go through. Hey, did you present both sides? Did you try to give each side a fair shake? So on and so forth, so that when the story passes through that net and it filters out all the baloney, we actually have something that either is resembling the truth or at least pulls out everything that could not be substantiated and falls in line within the truth and allows that bias to be yanked out of there at least to some degree. Now, if you have an editorial process where there is, and the editors would basically be the net here, along with the person's own internal compass of trying to be objective. But if you have an editorial person and a writer who both have their priors, if everybody in a newsroom thought like I did, and thought that, human beings are naturally bad and that we can't make a perfect system, a article talking about the fact that we can't make a perfect system, that's probably going to slip through more easily without acknowledging the other point of view that no, some people truly believe that we can be perfected and that everything that is bad is born of social institutions and systems that we have made here on Earth, and therefore they could be corrected by new systems. That will slip through 100% of the time because everybody shares the same point of view. So just because you're actively searching for the bias and you're trying to be objective doesn't mean that you're going to be able to always filter it out, but you should always try. And that's the point of not just being an organization like Truth Out that is only progressives, because you have a ecosystem that propels that forward. And a ecosystem that it bounces around in and then comes out screaming rather as a nice little hum if they possibly had other people in the newsroom who could provide a different point of view. And that is what objectivity was about. I mean, the New York Times literally put conservatives, they literally said it was like affirmative action for conservatives on their editorial board. Abe Rosenthal wanted to put conservatives on the editorial board because he felt like sometimes the perspectives, the positions weren't being fairly weighted. They weren't being given the time of day. So all of that is to say that no. Objective journalism, and also the interesting thing is that this new wave actually started to emerge after like 2006, 2008, when information was so widespread and put around the internet that you could actually isolate yourself so much you couldn't just rely on the big sources anymore or you didn't have to rely on the big sources for your news anymore. You could actually create your own bubble, and therefore, in order to get people's attention, you actually didn't have to be objective. You didn't have to cast a wide net. You just had to cast a deep net, so to speak. So instead of having as many people out as you can, you just focus on a certain segment and you plow deep into that. I think that's an interesting analogy. I'm going to have to refine that a little bit. But the point being that this is something that we started seeing blossoming then, and we've seen where it's led. We have seen the exacerbated coverage from multiple outlets from all over the internet that just allow people to sit in their echo chambers, and they raise the division. Thank the Lord that people go around and read multiple different outlets. They go and try to purposely pierce their bubble, and we need to have more of that. And if we can't get people who are objectively telling the story, then we have to go out and find multiple sources on said story and try to find a place where the objectivity lies or where the bias is stripped away. Because now that it's no longer on the journalist, we can't rely on the journalist anymore. Let's be clear, we probably shouldn't have anyway. You shouldn't rely on anybody else if you can. Sorry, that's not fair. There are clear examples. But when it comes to institutions and things of power within our nation, you shouldn't just rely on any one of them. If you can, try to get a really balanced perspective. And now you have to do a little bit more work, but it's definitely worth it because you're going to sound like a not crazy person in the room. But my point being that the landscape has shifted. It's on us now. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still hold objectivity up as something to strive for and actually try to enforce it back upon these organizations. We should say, no, we don't want your outwardly crazy bias. Some people do want the outwardly crazy bias stuff. That's fair enough. But maybe the rational people in the middle who kind of like the objectivity, the status quo, oh, look at that. While I disagree that objectivity is only a tool for enforcing the status quo, I definitely agree that objectivity, or at least having something that will appeal and have truth in it that could go from one side to the other and that even the middle can agree on, that is going to resonate with the overall opinions of the people within your society. And that's not what you want. That's not what you want when you want a revolution. So I see why these authors are frustrated at it. But a lot of people do like the status quo. A lot of people do like the middle. And we have to make sure as consumers, we're going to these different sources and saying, I'm actually going to pull my money. You've gone a little bit too far on this one. You're promoting the revolution a little bit too much. And sure, there will be the fringes who are very passionate, and they will always be very passionate and be very willing to hand over money to these organizations. But as the average day consumer, really think about where you're putting your money and what you're asking for from these journalism institutions. When there's a really sensational headline, make sure that you at least read the opposite opinion. Maybe you don't want to fall into the trap of it being overly sensational, so you just don't click on it. You don't give them the view for it. There's lots of different ways to do it, but we really do have to start thinking about this, because objectivity in journalism, while still talked about, is something that we have to ask for. We have to make sure that the different organizations put into place, because just like there is a mentality shift away from objective journalism because the money was away from objective journalism, we can make the mentality shift back to objective journalism by making sure the money is in objective journalism. And there are plenty of great institutions out there that purposely curate things. They tell you the bias of different sources, and people pay for them. So there obviously is a market there for it. We just have to make sure that the organizations that are actually reporting the news know that from the very beginning. And I want to jump to a clear example of where objectivity is no longer present in a article from the Crooks and Liars. It's basically on the same side of the aisle, and where it could very well do to include it. So the headline reads, Adam Schiff takes the gloves off, punches GOPers in the stupid face. So if you can't tell from the very beginning, then it definitely is not objective. Calling the GOPers just stupid. And Fair enough. You got your opinions, not objective journalism. You're telling it how you see it, what you feel about it. You're letting your feelings come through. Good for you. But if we're to take a step back and actually read what Adam Schiff was saying, let's give him a chance here. Quote, they say it's unprecedented to bring charges against a former president, he continued. You're darn right. He said something else. It's unprecedented. We've never had a president in the United States who was making hush money payments to porn stars. Wow, YouTube, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to deal with that one. And then falsifying business records to cover it up. Yeah, that's unprecedented. We've never had a president withhold classified information, then obstruct the investigation. That's unprecedented. We've never had a president incite a violent attack on the Capitol. That is unprecedented. So, if Crooks and Liars was being honest, maybe they would talk about some of the dealings with Bill Clinton after he left off. But, hey, that's fair enough. It's not exactly the same situation. Fair enough. In inciting the Capitol attack on the Capitol, that whether or not you actually believe the framing of the way they put that definitely is something that there are disparate views on. So you could possibly portray the other side, but no, they're going with their priors. They're not adding a comment. They just believe it as it is. They're putting it out there, sure. And then the other one is it's unprecedented that United States is making hush money payments to a blank star and then falsifying business records to cover it up. That's unprecedented. Yeah, no, though, that is all unprecedented. And an actual journalist would say, okay, these are all unprecedented. What's also unprecedented is a man going out every day for nearly 150 days saying that he had classified intelligence briefings that said Trump would go down, Trump is going down, Trump is going down. And then it turns out that the Steele dossier that they had based it off of was actually false, and that he didn't actually have any credible sources, or at least he had sources, but they definitely weren't credible, because guess what? Nothing came of it, boy. Nothing actually came of it. You couldn't actually fully indict. You couldn't actually fully impeach on it. You had to use a little roundabout way. So my point being here, whether or not you like Adam Schiff, I think that he's making great points here. Yeah, it's 100% true. Most of these things are very unprecedented. But if we were to take a more objective point of view, we would say, yes, these are all unprecedented, and it's also coming out of the mouth of a liar who should have no credibility in the eyes of the American public. But hey, political hack, political actor, he's going to do what he's going to do, just like you're going to have Mitch McConnell do what Mitch McConnell's going to do. You're going to have everybody who buys into a particular narrative and just try to spin it because they want their side to win, which, hey, it's politics, baby. It happens. I do not hate on anybody for doing it. If I was in their position, I would do it too. There's no doubt about that. But if I'm going to be a nice little outsider and be an idealist, and it's not, let's be clear, it's not even their political acting. Like I said, it's what they're supposed to do, or at least that's how the game is played. So I'm not going to begrudge them. But then when we have an institution that's meant to hold people accountable, that is what journalism is for, even if it is from the opposite side or from the same side of the aisle. You call them out to make sure that they fall more in line with you. No. You don't just have a full-hearted endorsement of everything that they do. It's interesting because this Crooks and Liars is not the same thing as Truth Out, but I'm not saying they have the same ideology, but I bet if you asked 50% of the people that work at Crooks and Liars, they would also at least align or agree that power dynamics are a very important thing to worry about when reporting. And yet, when someone with power agrees with them, no matter whether or not they're more powerful, they've done things, they've exploited their power before to lock people out of certain campaigns or promote their political opponent on the opposite side of the aisle in order to actually raise his status in the GOP primary. This happened in California, which, once again, brilliant political strategy, or at least, when I say brilliant, at least effective. I mean, we've seen this happen now. Democrats were elevating the more Trumpy of candidates so that they could win out in the end. Practical, great, good for you. You're playing the game. But then the institution on the outside that should be calling this sort of stuff out, oh, no. He's a powerful man and he's agreeing with us, so we'll go with it. We like him for now. No, call out power where it is, or don't call out power. And when you talk about the idea that, hold on, we have to protect the less powerful. We have to make sure that the powerful are held to account purely because of their nature as the powerful. And then you have an example exactly like this where they're not holding the people in power to account because they agree with them. It means that principle is just absolute baloney, and everything is just a tool in order to enforce their point of view. Period. Full stop. There is no middle. There is no objectivity. There is no truth anymore. And that, at least from their perspective, and that's outrageous. We can't let that stand. We cannot let that be the state of our nation. Okay? It will not end well. And all I ask is that everybody, like I said at the beginning, it's a little bit more work. Go through multiple sources. I don't care if you're a lefty. I don't care if you're a righty. I don't care if you're a libertarian. I don't care if you're an anarchist. I don't care if you are the most progressive, if you are more to the left than Bernie Sanders. I don't care. But make sure that you are searching out other sources that may say something different and you're not just falling to your priors. Let's be clear. I have a hard time with it. As I mentioned before, my bias has come into these podcasts many, many times. It even came into the podcast here today. I'm 100% certain of it because I talked about my worldview versus their worldview. But my point being, we have to try to make sure the incentives are in the right spot. If we want objective journalism, if we want to make sure that we're getting as much of the truth as possible, that we are holding the people who are holding the people to account, we have to make sure that they know the incentive is in the middle and objectivity is something we still crave. So if you made it this far, thank you for listening. We're going to end on a positive note. And this one comes from Upworthy. The headline reads, it's our daily delight, and the headline reads, a professor asked students to send photos of their dogs doing classwork, and it quickly got out of hand. And they even have a cat here. Honestly, the headline photo is absolutely hilarious. It's like a cat with its white paws on the middle of the book, its elbows out, holding down each side of the page. It looks like he's reading a large textbook. and it's absolutely adorable. And if you want to check out any of the photos or videos from this article, or you want to read any of today's articles, so the Adam Schiff one from Crooks and Liars, or the transcript from the Truth Out one, which also will have the link to the podcast within the article, those will be in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing. Don't die.